At 3 a.m., in a Chicago hospital, Lena Hart held her newborn daughter and made a call that would shatter every wall she'd built around her heart. The man who abandoned her 7 months ago, Marco DeLuca, the most dangerous man in the city, answered on the first ring. Her words were simple, devastating. "She's yours." By dawn, armed men would surround her hospital room. By week's end, she'd discover that his disappearance wasn't abandonment. It was protection. And now, holding their daughter between them, Lena faced an impossible choice. Trust the man who broke her heart, or run from the only protection that could keep them alive. If you're ready for a story of power, betrayal, and a love that refuses to die, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital buzzed with the kind of relentless hum that made exhaustion feel permanent. Lena Hart lay in the recovery room, her body trembling from 23 hours of labor, her arms wrapped around the smallest, most perfect thing she'd ever seen. Her daughter, 7 pounds, 2 ounces of dark hair and delicate fingers, slept against her chest, oblivious to the fact that she'd been born into a world her mother couldn't navigate alone. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia with gray streaks in her hair and eyes that had seen too many young mothers in crisis, stood by the doorway. She'd been checking on Lena every 30 minutes since the delivery, her concern growing with each visit. No family, no friends, no partner. Just a 26-year-old woman who'd labored alone, gripping the bed rails with white knuckles, refusing the epidural because she needed to feel everything, needed to prove to herself that she was strong enough for what came next. "Honey," Patricia said softly, moving closer to the bed, "is there anyone I can call for you? Anyone at all?" Lena stared at her daughter's face, memorizing the slope of her tiny nose, the way her lips pursed even in sleep. She'd spent 7 months preparing to do this alone. 7 months working double shifts at the diner, saving every penny, converting the closet in her studio apartment into something resembling a nursery. 7 months telling herself that she didn't need Marco DeLuca, that she was better off without him. But holding her daughter now, feeling the weight of absolute responsibility settling onto shoulders already bowed by exhaustion, Lena knew the truth. She was terrified. "There's someone," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming through contractions. "But I don't know if he'll come." Patricia's expression shifted to something more careful, more professional. She'd worked labor and delivery for 15 years. She knew the tone of a woman talking about a man who'd hurt her. "Do you want him to come?" Lena closed her eyes. Did she? Marco had disappeared from her life so completely, so thoroughly, that for the first month she'd thought she'd imagined their entire affair. 3 weeks of intensity so overwhelming it had rewired something fundamental in her chest. Then nothing, no calls, no texts. The restaurant where they'd met, where he'd watched her serve tables for 2 weeks before finally approaching her, had changed ownership. The phone number he'd given her went to a disconnected line. She'd convinced herself it was a blessing. Men like Marco DeLuca didn't build lives with women like her. He was power and danger wrapped in custom suits, a man who walked into rooms and changed the air pressure. She was a diner waitress from South Side, a girl who'd put herself through community college and still couldn't afford to fix the leak in her bathroom ceiling. But this baby, their daughter, deserved more than Lena's pride. "His name is Marco DeLuca," Lena said, opening her eyes to meet Patricia's gaze. "I don't have a current number, but if you call the main line for DeLuca Imports and say it's about Lena Hart, he'll take the call." Something flickered across Patricia's face, recognition, maybe, or concern. In Chicago, the DeLuca name carried weight. Everyone knew Marco's family controlled half the shipping that came through the port. Everyone suspected it wasn't all legitimate. But Patricia was a professional. She simply nodded. "What should I tell him?" Lena looked down at her daughter, at the small miracle who had Marco's dark hair, Marco's strong chin, even in miniature. "Tell him the baby is his. Tell him," her voice cracked. "Tell him I need him." Patricia squeezed her hand once, then left the room. Through the partially open door, Lena could hear her footsteps retreating down the hallway, then the low murmur of a phone conversation. She couldn't make out the words, but she heard the shift in Patricia's tone. from professional courtesy to something more urgent, more insistent. Lena pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, breathing in that new baby smell that everyone talked about but no one could adequately describe. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I can't give you a normal life, but I promise you'll be safe. Whatever it takes, you'll be safe." The baby stirred, making a small sound that shot straight through Lena's chest. She'd read all the books, taken the free classes at the community center, practiced swaddling on borrowed dolls. Nothing had prepared her for this feeling, this all-consuming terror mixed with fierce, primal love. Patricia returned 20 minutes later, her expression unreadable. "He's coming," she said simply. "He'll be here within the hour." Lena's heart lurched. "He's coming? Just like that?" Just like that. Patricia moved to check the baby's vitals, her movements efficient but gentle. "He asked if you were okay, if the baby was okay. Then he said he'd be here as fast as possible." She paused, meeting Lena's eyes. "He sounded shaken." Shaken. Marco DeLuca, the man who'd faced down rival businessmen without blinking, who'd once ended a tense negotiation with nothing but a cold smile and a single word, sounded shaken by the news that he had a daughter. "I need to clean up," Lena said suddenly, panic rising in her chest. "You need to rest," Patricia interrupted firmly. "You just pushed a human being out of your body. He can deal with seeing you tired." But Lena was already struggling to sit up, wincing at the pain that radiated through her entire core. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the sink, hair matted with sweat, face pale and puffy, hospital gown stained with blood, and fluids she didn't want to think about. This wasn't how she'd imagined seeing Marco again. In her mind, when she'd allowed herself to imagine it at all, she'd been put together, strong, showing him exactly what he'd walked away from. Not this, not vulnerable and broken down and desperate. "At least let me help you get cleaned up," Patricia offered, her voice kind. "There's a shower in the ensuite bathroom. I'll watch the baby." The thought of letting her daughter out of her sight, even for 10 minutes, made Lena's arms tighten instinctively. But she also knew Patricia was right. She couldn't face Marco like this. Couldn't face anything like this. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The shower was torture on her exhausted body, but the hot water sluicing away the physical evidence of labor helped clear her mind. She dressed in the clean clothes she'd packed in her hospital bag, yoga pants and an oversized sweater that hid how much her body had changed. Her hair was still wet when she emerged, but at least she looked human again. Patricia had changed the baby into a fresh onesie, wrapped her in a pink hospital blanket that someone had donated years ago. The baby was awake now, dark eyes unfocused but searching, as if trying to make sense of this bright, loud world she'd been thrust into. "She's beautiful," Patricia said. "Have you chosen a name?" Lena shook her head. She'd had a list, had narrowed it down to 3 possibilities, but now, looking at her daughter, none of them felt right. "I want him to help decide," she admitted. "If he stays, if he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "If he wants us." Patricia's expression softened with understanding. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to move you to a private room on the executive floor," she said carefully. "He's covering all medical expenses. I told him you were in a standard recovery room, and he said—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "He said to give you the best of everything. That money wasn't a concern." Of course it wasn't. For Marco, money had never been a concern. It was power that drove him, influence that he accumulated like other men collected cars or watches. And now Lena was about to ask him to extend that power over her, over their daughter. The thought made her stomach twist with something between relief and dread. "I'll stay here," Lena said quietly. "I don't need a private room. I just need—" She stopped as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Not the soft-soled shuffle of nurses, but the sharp click of expensive leather on linoleum. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with purpose and precision. Patricia moved to the door instinctively, blocking the entrance with her body. Lena clutched her daughter closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then Marco DeLuca filled the doorway, and the air in the room changed completely. He looked exactly as Lena remembered, and entirely different. The same dark hair, professionally cut, but slightly disheveled now, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. The same sharp jaw, the same intense eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. But there was something new in his expression, something raw and unguarded that Lena had never seen before. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent, but the jacket was unbuttoned, the tie loosened. He looked like a man who dressed for a business meeting and then run halfway across the city. Behind him stood two men in dark suits, clearly security, their eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency. They stayed in the hallway, but their presence was a reminder of exactly who Marco was, what he was. "Out," Marco said quietly to Patricia, his eyes never leaving Lena. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't a request either. Patricia bristled. "I'm her nurse. I need to—" "Please," Lena interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. Give us a few minutes." Patricia hesitated, then nodded. She touched Lena's shoulder once, a silent offer of support, before leaving the room. The security guards pulled the door closed behind her, and suddenly Lena and Marco were alone, except for the tiny life cradled between them. Marco took one step into the room, then stopped, as if an invisible barrier had materialized. His hands hung at his sides, but Lena could see them trembling slightly, a detail so incongruous with the man she remembered that it made her breath catch. "Is it true?" His voice was rougher than she remembered, stripped of the smooth confidence that usually characterized his speech. "Is she mine?" Lena could have made him wait, could have made him suffer the way she'd suffered when he disappeared. But looking at his face, seeing genuine fear there, she couldn't do it. "Yes," she said simply. "She's yours." Marco closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard Lena could see the muscle jump. When he opened them again, there was something fierce and possessive burning there, something that should have frightened her but instead sent an entirely different kind of shiver down her spine. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, moving closer now, drawn to the baby like gravity. "Why didn't you find a way to—" "You disappeared," Lena cut him off, and 7 months of hurt bled into those two words. "You vanished completely, Marco. I tried calling. I went to the restaurant. I even called your company's main line once, and they told me you didn't accept personal calls. What was I supposed to do? Show up at your office pregnant and hope you'd see me?" Something like pain crossed his face. "You should have done exactly that. You should have—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Christ, Lena, a baby. We have a baby." "I have a baby," Lena corrected, her voice sharper than she intended. "You have a decision to make." Marco's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw the danger there now, the edge that had always lurked beneath his polished surface. "There's no decision," he said flatly. "She's mine. You're—" He stopped himself, jaw working. "You're under my protection now. Both of you. That's not negotiable." "Everything is negotiable," Lena said quietly. "I called you because she deserves to know her father, because I couldn't do this alone as much as I wanted to. But I'm not some possession you can claim, Marco. If you want to be part of her life, it's on my terms." For a long moment they stared at each other, the silence broken only by the baby's small, sleepy sounds. Then Marco moved closer, close enough that Lena could smell his cologne, something expensive and cedar-scented that brought back memories of tangled sheets and whispered promises. "Can I see her?" he asked, and the careful restraint in his voice told Lena how much the request cost him. "Please." Lena adjusted the blanket, revealing their daughter's face fully. The baby's eyes were open now, unfocused but searching, and when Marco leaned in, something extraordinary happened. The baby turned toward him, as if recognizing something fundamental and undeniable. "Holy hell," Marco breathed. "She has my mother's chin. Look at—" His voice cracked, and he had to stop, pressing his fist against his mouth. Lena had prepared herself for many scenarios. Anger, denial, even cold acceptance. She hadn't prepared for this. For Marco De Luca, the most controlled man she'd ever met, coming completely undone at the sight of his daughter. "What's her name?" he asked when he could speak again. "I haven't decided yet," Lena admitted. "I wanted to wait until I knew if I'd show up," Marco finished, and there was self-recrimination in his tone. "Jesus, Lena, I'm so sorry. For all of it. You have no idea how sorry I am." "Then tell me why," Lena said, and she hated how her voice shook. "Tell me why you left. Why you made me feel like I'd imagined everything between us." Marco's hand moved toward the baby, stopped, moved again. Lena recognized the hesitation,
the fear of doing something wrong. Can I hold her? It should have been an easy yes. He was her father. He had every right. But Lena found herself hesitating too, the instinct to protect her daughter overriding everything else. Then she looked at Marco's face, at the naked longing there, and carefully transferred the baby into his arms. He held her like she was made of glass, his large hands cradling her with unexpected gentleness.
The baby made a small sound, and Marco's entire expression transformed into something Lena had never seen before, something soft and completely unguarded.
"Hi," he whispered to his daughter. "Hi, beautiful girl. I'm your dad, and I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. That's on me, not your mom. That's all on me." Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd been so angry at him for so long, had built such high walls around the hurt. Seeing him like this, vulnerable and completely captivated, was dismantling those walls faster than she could rebuild them. "You asked why I left," Marco said, still looking at the baby. "The truth is complicated, and you're not going to like it. But you deserve to know." He finally raised his eyes to Lena's. "I left because staying was putting you in danger. Because my life, my world, was about to get very messy, and I couldn't stomach the thought of you getting caught in it." "That's not your decision to make," Lena said, though her voice lacked heat. "You don't get to decide what risks I can handle." "You're right," Marco agreed, "but I made it anyway. And I've regretted it every single day since." He paused, his jaw tightening. "There were people who wanted to hurt me by hurting anyone I cared about. I had to make them think you meant nothing, that you were just another woman I'd entertained briefly. The only way to do that was to cut all contact, to disappear completely." Lena's hands clenched in her lap. "And it never occurred to you to tell me? To let me make my own choice? If I'd told you, you would have argued. You would have wanted to stay, to help, to—" He shook his head. "You don't know what these people are capable of, Lena. What they would have done to prove a point." Past tense, Lena noticed. Would have done. What changed? Marco's smile was cold and utterly without humor. "I made sure they couldn't hurt anyone ever again. It took 6 months, but I eliminated the threat permanently." His eyes moved back to the baby. "I was planning to find you next week, to explain everything and ask if you'd give me another chance. And now—" He laughed, but it sounded strained. "Now I find out I have a daughter." Lena processed this information slowly, turning it over in her mind. Part of her wanted to be furious at his arrogance, his assumption that he could eliminate threats and control outcomes like pieces on a chessboard. But another part understood the ruthless logic behind his actions. Marco didn't do anything halfway. If he'd decided she needed protection, he would have moved heaven and earth to provide it, even if it meant breaking her heart in the process. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Marco's arms tightened fractionally around the baby. "Now you and our daughter come home with me. I have a house in Lincoln Park, completely secure, private, with everything you could possibly need. You'll have nurses if you want them, staff to help with anything, whatever you need to recover and care for the baby." "I have an apartment," Lena said, though even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. "A studio in South Side," Marco said flatly. "I know, Lena. I've been keeping tabs, making sure you were safe, even if I couldn't contact you directly. That apartment isn't suitable for a baby. The building has a broken security door. The heat cuts out twice a week. You can barely afford it on your own, and now you have a child to support." Lena felt anger flare hot in her chest. "You've been watching me. For 7 months you've been—" "Making sure you were safe," Marco interrupted, his voice hard. "Making sure that when I eliminated the threat, you'd still be alive to hate me for leaving. Yes, Lena. I've had people watching you, and when I found out about the baby—" He stopped, his jaw working. "If I'd known you were pregnant, nothing would have kept me away. Not threats, not strategy, nothing. You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything," Lena said, but her voice was shaking. "You made choices for me, Marco. You're still making them. What if I say no? What if I take our daughter and walk out of here, go back to my inadequate apartment with its broken security door, and raise her on my own?" Marco's expression turned glacial, and for a moment Lena saw the man his enemies must see. The one who controlled a shipping empire and made people disappear when they became inconvenient. "That's not going to happen," he said quietly. "I won't allow it." "You won't allow it?" Lena's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. You don't get to Yes, I do, Marco cut her off. Because like it or not, you called me. You made me aware of my daughter's existence. And now that I know, there is no version of this where I let you walk away and struggle alone. It's not happening, Lena. Fight me if you want, but you won't win. The baby started to fuss, picking up on the tension in the room, and both of them immediately shifted their focus to her. Marco rocked her instinctively, his expression softening as he murmured something too quiet for Lena to hear. Watching him with their daughter, Lena felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked down tight since the day he disappeared. She'd told herself she was over him, that what they'd shared was just a brief, intense affair that would have burned out anyway. But seeing him now, seeing the way he looked at their daughter, she knew that had been a lie. She'd never gotten over Marco DeLuca, and now he was back, offering her security and support and a life she'd never imagined, wrapped in control and possession and the kind of power that both attracted and terrified her. I'm not your prisoner, she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. If I agree to this, if I come to your house, it's temporary, until I figure out what I'm doing, and you don't make decisions about our daughter without consulting me, ever. Marco's eyes found hers, and something shifted in his expression, a grudging respect mixing with that fierce possessiveness. Agreed, he said, but you'll stay in the house. You'll let my security keep you safe, and you'll give me a chance to prove that I can be what you both need. It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. One chance, Marco. That's all you get. His smile was small but genuine. I won't need another. The baby chose that moment to start crying in earnest, her small face scrunching with newborn outrage. Marco looked momentarily panicked, holding her away from his body as if afraid he'd broken her. She's probably hungry, Lena said, unable to suppress a small smile at his expression. Give her here. Marco transferred the baby back carefully, watching as Lena adjusted her position and lifted her sweater. He turned away immediately, giving her privacy she hadn't asked for, and Lena felt another small crack appear in her armor. I'll arrange everything, Marco said, his back still turned. The security will stay outside your door tonight. Tomorrow morning, a car will bring you both to the house. I'll have everything set up by then. Nursery, medical equipment, whatever you need. Marco, Lena said quietly. He turned, and the naked hope in his eyes made her breath catch. We need to name her, Lena said. I can't keep calling her the baby. Marco moved closer again, careful to maintain Lena's privacy, but close enough to see their daughter's face as she nursed. What names were you considering? I had a list, Lena admitted, but none of them felt right. I thought maybe... She hesitated, then pushed forward. Your mother's name, you said she had the same chin. Something profound shifted in Marco's expression. Sophia, he said softly. My mother's name was Sophia. She died when I was 12. Sophia, Lena repeated, looking down at their daughter. Sophia DeLuca Hart. Just DeLuca, Marco said immediately, then caught himself at Lena's sharp look. Or Hart. Or both. Whatever you want. Both, Lena decided. Sophia Hart DeLuca. So she knows she comes from both of us. Marco reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Sophia's small hand where it rested against Lena's chest. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and Lena watched Marco's entire world narrow to that single point of contact. Sophia, he whispered. My Sophia. I promise you'll always be safe. I promise you'll have everything I didn't. A mother who loves you, a father who will never leave, a life free from... He stopped, jaw clenching. From what? Lena asked. Marco's eyes lifted to hers, and she saw shadows there, old pain, old scars. From the darkness I grew up in, the violence and the fear and the constant calculation of who to trust. She'll have better, I'll make sure of it. Lena wanted to ask how he planned to achieve that, how a man built from violence and power intended to create a life of peace for his daughter. But Sophia had finished nursing and was falling asleep against Lena's chest, her small body relaxing completely in that way only newborns could manage. You should rest, Marco said.
watching them both with an expression Lena couldn't quite read. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." "You're staying?" Lena asked, surprised. "Did you think I'd leave?" Marco's voice was rough. "I've missed 7 months of your pregnancy, Lena. I missed all of it. The first ultrasound, the first kick, the terror you must have felt doing this alone. I'm not missing another second." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. And if I could go back and find another way to keep you safe, one that didn't destroy you in the process, I would. In a heartbeat." Then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him, leaving Lena alone with their daughter and thoughts that spiraled in too many directions to control. She settled Sophia into the small hospital bassinet, tucking the blanket around her with hands that had become familiar with the motion after only a few hours. Through the partially open door, she could hear Marco's voice, low and commanding as he spoke to his security team. Every few minutes, she caught her name, or Sophia's, and each time his tone would soften fractionally before hardening again. A man of contradictions, she thought, capable of violence and tenderness, control and surrender, calculation and pure emotion. And now the father of her child, a man she'd trusted once, who'd shattered that trust completely, and who was asking for a chance to rebuild it. Lena closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept her alert. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in Marco's world, in his house, under his protection, surrounded by security and luxury, and all the trappings of a life she'd never imagined. Tonight, she let herself sleep, lulled by the sound of Sophia's breathing and the knowledge that for the first time in 7 months, she wasn't alone. Outside her door, Marco DeLuca stood guard, his eyes scanning the hallway with professional precision while his mind raced with plans and promises. He'd built an empire from blood and ruthlessness. He'd eliminated threats and accumulated power and never once questioned the cost. But looking at his daughter's face, at the miracle he'd somehow helped create, Marco made a promise he'd never made before. Whatever it took, however long the road, he would become a man worthy of the trust in Lena's eyes and the innocence in Sophia's small, perfect features, even if it meant tearing down everything he'd built and starting over from the ashes. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds in soft gray strips, waking Lena from a sleep too brief and too fragile. Sophia had nursed 3 times during the night, each session leaving Lena more exhausted but also more certain of one truth. She would do anything for this tiny person who'd turned her entire world inside out in less than 24 hours. She heard voices outside her door before she fully opened her eyes, Marco's low rumble and Patricia's firmer, more insistent tone. They were arguing about something, their words muffled but the tension clear even through the walls. "Mr. DeLuca, hospital policy clearly states..." "I don't care about hospital policy. My daughter needs the best care available, and this room doesn't meet my standards." "Your daughter is receiving excellent care. Ms. Hart is recovering well, and the baby is healthy. Moving them now would be disruptive and unnecessary." Lena sat up slowly, wincing at the soreness that radiated through her entire core. Sophia was awake in her bassinet, making the small snuffling sounds that Lena had already learned meant she'd be crying soon if her needs weren't met. She lifted her daughter carefully, marveling again at how something so small could feel so monumentally important. The door opened before Lena could call out, and Marco entered carrying a leather bag she recognized as designer, probably worth more than her monthly salary. He stopped when he saw her holding Sophia, his expression softening immediately. "You're awake," he said, stating the obvious, because apparently even Marco DeLuca struggled with small talk when faced with domestic situations. "I brought clothes. Yours from your apartment and some new things I thought you might need." Lena stared at him. "You went to my apartment?" "I sent someone," Marco corrected. "I wasn't leaving the hospital. They packed everything you'd need for the next few weeks. Clothes, toiletries, personal items. I also had them bring the things you'd set up for the baby." The casual way he said it, as if sending people to pack up her life was perfectly normal, made Lena's jaw tighten. "You had people go through my apartment? Through my things?" Marco set the bag down, his movements careful. "I had a woman on my security team handle it. Maria. She's discreet and professional. She only packed what seemed necessary."
That's not the point, Marco. Lena adjusted Sophia, who was starting to fuss more insistently. You can't just make decisions like that without asking me first. You needed clothes. The baby needed supplies. I provided them. Marco's voice took on an edge of frustration. Would you have preferred to wear a hospital gown home? I would have preferred you ask. Lena's voice rose, and Sophia responded by starting to cry in earnest.
The sound cut through the tension immediately, both of them focusing on the baby instead of each other. Marco moved closer, his hands hovering uncertainly. What does she need? Is she hungry? Probably, Lena said, her anger deflating as exhaustion rushed back in. But I need to change her first. Can you hand me the diaper bag? Marco looked around the room, spotted the small bag the hospital had provided, and brought it over. He watched as Lena laid Sophia on the bed and began the awkward process of changing a diaper with sore muscles and trembling hands. Let me help, Marco said when Lena fumbled with the tabs for the second time. You know how to change a diaper? Something flickered across his face, old pain quickly suppressed. My sister had a baby when I was 16. I helped take care of him before... He stopped abruptly. I remember the basics. Lena hesitated, then shifted to give him access. Marco's hands were surprisingly steady as he finished fastening the diaper, his movements efficient despite the obvious newness of the task. When he lifted Sophia, supporting her head with the kind of careful attention that spoke of genuine concern, Lena felt another piece of her defensive wall crumble. What happened to your nephew? She asked quietly. Marco's jaw tightened. That's a conversation for another time. Right now we need to focus on getting you both home and settled. Home. The word hung between them, loaded with implications Lena wasn't ready to examine. Marco's house wasn't her home. Her cramped studio with its leaking ceiling and broken heater was home, or had been, until yesterday when everything changed. I want to see it first, Lena said. The house. Before I agree to stay there with Sophia. Marco's eyes met hers, and she saw the calculation there. The weighing of options, the strategic assessment of how much to push and when to concede. Agreed, he said finally. We'll go there directly from the hospital. If you're not comfortable, we'll make other arrangements. It was a concession she hadn't expected, and the surprise must have shown on her face because Marco's expression shifted to something almost wry. I'm not a complete autocrat, Lena. I want you to feel safe, both of you. If my house doesn't accomplish that, there's no point. Patricia knocked once before entering, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp as they moved between Lena and Marco. The discharge paperwork is ready whenever you are, Ms. Hart. I'll need to go over post-delivery care instructions and the baby's feeding schedule. I'll step out, Marco said immediately, transferring Sophia back to Lena with surprising gentleness. I need to make some calls anyway. He left without waiting for a response, and Lena watched the door close behind him with mixed feelings. Patricia settled into the chair beside the bed, her expression softening now that they were alone. How are you really doing, honey? She asked, her tone more personal than professional. Lena felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. I don't know, she admitted. Yesterday I was terrified and alone. Today I have more help than I know what to do with, and somehow that's almost more frightening. Patricia nodded as if this made perfect sense. Mr. DeLuca seems very invested in taking care of you both. He's used to controlling situations, Lena said carefully. I'm just not sure how much of this is about me and Sophia, and how much is about him managing a problem. Can I give you some advice? Patricia asked, her voice gentle. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen all kinds of fathers come through those doors. Excited ones, terrified ones, angry ones who resent the responsibility. Mr. DeLuca sat outside your door all night. He didn't sleep. He didn't leave even to get coffee. Every time your baby made a sound, he was on his feet, checking to see if you needed anything. She paused, meeting Lena's eyes. That's not a man managing a problem. That's a man who's already completely in love with his daughter. Lena absorbed this information slowly, turning it over in her mind. She'd been so focused on her own anger and fear that she hadn't fully considered what this must be like for Marco. Discovering he had a daughter, trying to process that reality while also trying to protect them both in the only way he knew how. I'm still mad at him, Lena said quietly, for leaving, for not trusting me to handle the truth. Good, Patricia said firmly. You should be.
But being angry doesn't mean you can't also accept help when it's offered genuinely. She pulled out a folder of paperwork. Now let's talk about what you need to know for the next few weeks. The instructions were overwhelming, feeding schedules and warning signs and when to call the pediatrician. Lena tried to absorb it all, taking notes on her phone while Sophia dozed in her arms, but exhaustion made everything feel distant and surreal. Marco returned just as Patricia was finishing, carrying coffee and what looked like breakfast pastries from somewhere expensive. He handed Lena a cup without asking, already prepared the way she liked it, light and sweet with extra cream. "You remembered," she said before she could stop herself. "I remember everything about you," Marco replied quietly, and the intensity in his eyes made Lena's breath catch. Patricia cleared her throat diplomatically. "I'll give you two some privacy. Ms. Hart, you're cleared for discharge whenever you're ready. Take care of yourself and don't hesitate to call if you have any concerns." She left with a last meaningful look at Lena, and then they were alone again, Lena and Marco and the tiny life that connected them irrevocably. "The car is waiting downstairs," Marco said, settling into the chair Patricia had vacated. "Whenever you're ready to leave, we can go." Lena sipped the coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine steady her nerves. "Tell me about the house. What should I expect?" Marco leaned back, his posture relaxed but his eyes watchful. "It's in Lincoln Park, on a private street. 6 bedrooms, full security system, staff quarters. I've had the master suite prepared for you and Sophia. There's an adjoining nursery that my decorator set up overnight based on the items from your apartment." "Overnight," Lena repeated. "You had a nursery decorated overnight." "I made it clear that it was a priority," Marco said without a trace of irony. "The house has round-the-clock security, but they're discreet. You won't see them unless there's a problem. I've also hired a baby nurse if you want help. Maria's daughter, actually. She's certified in newborn care and comes highly recommended." Lena processed this flood of information, trying to reconcile the man offering her professional childcare with the one who'd held Sophia last night like she might break. "What about you? Where will you be in this house?" "I have a suite on the opposite wing," Marco said carefully. "I didn't want to presume—" He stopped, jaw working. "You'll have privacy, space, whatever you need." It was the right answer, the respectful answer, but something in Lena deflated slightly at the thought of being alone in a strange house with only hired staff for company. She pushed the feeling down, refusing to examine it too closely. "Okay," she said finally, "let's go see it." Getting out of the hospital took longer than expected. Marco had brought an infant car seat that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent, and it took both of them several attempts to figure out how to secure Sophia properly. By the time they made it to the elevator, Sophia was screaming, Lena was sweating despite the cool air, and Marco looked like he was recalculating every life choice that had led to this moment. "Is she supposed to hate the car seat this much?" he asked over Sophia's wails. "The books say some babies just don't like being restrained," Lena said, bouncing Sophia gently while trying to soothe her. "She'll get used to it." Marco looked skeptical, but said nothing as they exited the elevator to the hospital's main floor. A black SUV was waiting directly outside the entrance, and 2 men in dark suits materialized from nowhere to flank them. Lena recognized the security detail from last night, silent, efficient, and vaguely intimidating. One of them opened the rear door while the other scanned the street with professional intensity. Marco guided Lena into the back seat with a hand on her lower back, the touch somehow both possessive and protective. He slid in beside her, and within seconds they were moving through Chicago's morning traffic. Sophia stopped crying the moment the car started moving, her small face relaxing into sleep so abruptly that Lena almost laughed. "Figures," she muttered. 5 minutes in the car and she's out." Marco was watching his daughter with an expression Lena couldn't quite read. "She's perfect," he said quietly. "Even when she's screaming, she's perfect." The sincerity in his voice disarmed Lena completely. She wanted to stay angry, to maintain the protective distance that would keep her heart safe. But looking at Marco's face as he gazed at Sophia, she saw something that made her chest ache, a vulnerability that he probably didn't even realize he was showing. "Tell me about your mother," Lena said impulsively. "You said Sophia has her chin. What else should I know about her?" Marco's expression shifted, old pain surfacing. "She died in a car accident when I was 12.
Drunk driver ran a red light. His voice was carefully controlled, stripped of emotion. She was kind, patient, everything my father wasn't. She tried to shield us from his business, from the violence and the danger. She almost succeeded. "I'm sorry," Lena said softly. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." Marco's jaw tightened. But I remember what it felt like to lose her, to have someone who made me feel safe and then suddenly have nothing but danger and uncertainty. I won't let Sophia experience that. Whatever it takes, she'll grow up feeling protected. The vehemence in his voice told Lena this wasn't just about Sophia. It was about the boy he'd been, trying to navigate a world that had suddenly become hostile and unpredictable. It made his overprotectiveness make more sense, even if she still disagreed with his methods. The SUV turned onto a tree-lined street that looked like something from a magazine spread. The houses were massive, set back from the road behind iron gates and manicured lawns. Marco's house was at the end of the street, a limestone mansion that managed to look both imposing and somehow welcoming. "This is it," Marco said as the gates swung open automatically. "Welcome home." The word again, home, and this time Lena didn't correct him. She was too busy staring at the house, at the pristine walkway and the fountain in the circular driveway and the sheer scale of wealth on display. Her entire apartment could fit in the entrance hall alone. Marco helped her out of the car with careful attention, then handled the car seat with growing confidence. A woman appeared at the front door, 50s, well-dressed, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Ms. Hart, I'm Angela, Mr. DeLuca's house manager. Welcome. I've prepared the master suite, much suite as requested, and Maria is waiting upstairs to help with anything you need." Lena followed Angela inside, trying not to gape at the marble floors and the sweeping staircase and the artwork that was probably worth more than she'd earn in a lifetime. Marco stayed close, his hand hovering near her lower back as if ready to catch her if she stumbled. The master suite was on the second floor, and when Angela opened the double doors, Lena stopped breathing. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. The bed was king-sized and looked impossibly comfortable, but it was the adjoining nursery that made Lena's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Someone had recreated her apartment nursery exactly, the same white crib she'd bought secondhand, the same mobile with stars and moons, the same rocking chair she'd found at a garage sale and refinished herself. But everything had been elevated somehow. The crib was positioned near a window with gauzy curtains. The walls were painted a soft gray that made the space feel calm and peaceful. And there were additions she could never have afforded. A changing table stocked with supplies, a bookshelf already filled with children's books, a sound machine, everything a new mother could possibly need. "I had them match what you'd chosen," Marco said quietly beside her. "I didn't want Sophia to feel like she was in a completely unfamiliar place, but if you want anything changed, it's perfect," Lena interrupted, her voice thick. "Marco, it's perfect." He looked relieved, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. A young woman appeared in the doorway, late 20s, with kind eyes and capable hands. "Miss Hart, I'm Maria. My mother sends her regards. She said you might remember her from the hospital." Lena nodded, still processing the nursery, the house, the overwhelming reality of her new situation. "It's nice to meet you. I'm here to help however you need," Maria continued. "Diaper changes, feeding support, or just someone to hold the baby while you sleep. Whatever makes this easier for you." The offer was so genuine, so free of judgment, that Lena felt tears prick at her eyes for the second time that day. "Thank you," she managed. Marco cleared his throat. "I'll let you get settled. Angela will bring up lunch in an hour, and I've arranged for a pediatrician to visit this afternoon, just a routine check to make sure Sophia is adjusting well." He paused at the door. "If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. Anything at all." Then he was gone, and Lena was alone with Maria and a sleeping Sophia in a room that felt both luxurious and strangely comforting. "Let's get you both settled," Maria said gently. "You look exhausted, and the baby will be awake soon wanting to nurse. Why don't you change into something comfortable while I set up the bassinet?" Lena found her clothes unpacked in the massive walk-in closet, her worn jeans and clearance rack sweaters looking out of place among the built-in shelving and soft lighting. But there were also new things. Soft pajamas in her size, a robe that looked like it cost more than her weekly grocery budget,
nursing-friendly tops she definitely hadn't owned before. She changed into the pajamas because they looked impossibly comfortable, then settled into the bed that was, in fact, the most comfortable thing she'd ever experienced. Maria brought Sophia to her when she started fussing, showing Lena different nursing positions that might be more comfortable while she recovered. "You're doing great," Maria said as Sophia latched successfully. "Some women struggle with this for weeks. You're a natural." Lena didn't feel like a natural.
She felt overwhelmed and uncertain and desperately grateful for Maria's calm competence. But she smiled anyway, watching Sophia's small face as she nursed, feeling that fierce protective love surge through her again. After Sophia finished eating and drifted back to sleep, Maria helped Lena into the shower, the first real shower she'd had since before labor. The bathroom was ridiculous. Heated floors, a rainfall showerhead, and toiletries that smelled expensive and felt like silk on her exhausted body. When she emerged, clean and slightly more human, she found Angela setting up lunch on a small table by the window. The food looked like it had come from a restaurant: grilled chicken, fresh vegetables, crusty bread, and a dessert that made Lena's mouth water just looking at it. "Mr. DeLuca said you'd need plenty of calories while nursing," Angela explained. "The chef prepared several options, so just let me know what appeals to you." Lena ate mechanically at first, too hungry to really taste anything. But as her body started to feel more settled, she became aware of the quality of the food, the care that had gone into preparing it. This was Marco's world, a place where problems were solved with money and efficiency, where comfort was a given rather than a luxury. She was finishing the last of her meal when Marco knocked softly on the doorframe. "The pediatrician is here, Dr. Chen. She's one of the best in Chicago." Dr. Chen was a woman in her 40s with gentle hands and a thorough approach. She examined Sophia carefully, asking Lena questions about feeding and sleeping and general behavior. When she finished, she smiled warmly. "She's absolutely perfect. Good weight, strong reflexes, no concerns at all. You're doing an excellent job, Ms. Hart." The validation shouldn't have meant so much, but after the uncertainty of the past 24 hours, Lena felt tears threaten again. Marco noticed immediately, his expression shifting to concern. "What's wrong? Is something wrong with Sophia?" "No," Dr. Chen said quickly. "Everything is fine. Your daughter is healthy and thriving." She glanced between them, a knowing look in her eyes. "New parenthood is overwhelming even in the best circumstances. You both need to be patient with yourselves and with each other." After Dr. Chen left, Marco lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something but unsure how to start. Lena took pity on him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. The house, the staff, the doctor. It's more than I expected." Marco moved into the room, his movements careful, as if approaching a skittish animal. "You shouldn't have to do this alone, Lena. Neither of you should." He paused. "I know I can't undo the past 7 months. I can't give you back the pregnancy I should have been there for, but I can make sure the future is different." "Can you?" Lena asked, and she wasn't trying to be cruel. She genuinely wanted to know. "Your life is dangerous, Marco. You said so yourself. How do you plan to keep Sophia safe while still being who you are?" Marco's jaw tightened and she saw something shift in his eyes, determination mixed with something that looked almost like resignation. "I'm making changes," he said carefully, starting to transition away from the more problematic aspects of the business. "It won't happen overnight, but it will happen." "Why now?" Lena pressed. "Because of Sophia?" "Because of both of you," Marco corrected. "Because I realize that the empire I've built means nothing if I'm alone in it. Because holding my daughter last night made me understand what my mother must have felt. The terror of loving someone in a world where violence is always one wrong move away." The raw honesty in his voice caught Lena off guard. This wasn't the smooth, controlled Marco she remembered from their affair. This was someone struggling with massive questions, trying to reconcile who he'd been with, who he wanted to become. "That kind of change takes time," Lena said quietly. "Years, probably." "Then it takes years," Marco said simply. "I'm not asking you to trust me immediately, Lena. I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be what you both need. Give me that chance, and I promise I won't waste it." Before Lena could respond, Sophia woke with a cry that quickly escalated to full-blown screaming.
Both of them moved toward the bassinet simultaneously, nearly colliding in their haste. "Let me," Marco said, lifting Sophia with growing confidence. He bounced her gently, murmuring soft reassurances that did nothing to stop the crying. "What does she need? Is she hungry again?" "Probably needs to be changed," Lena said, unable to suppress a small smile at his panicked expression. "Welcome to parenthood, Marco. It's not all sweet sleeping moments." They worked together to change Sophia, Marco's hand steadier now, but still careful, as if his daughter might shatter if he wasn't gentle enough. When Sophia was clean and dry, she calmed slightly, though she still fussed in that newborn way that suggested general displeasure with the world. "She's so small," Marco said wonderingly, cradling her against his chest. "How is something this small also this loud?" Lena laughed despite her exhaustion. "Just wait until she really gets going. This is nothing." Marco looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. A tenderness that had nothing to do with Sophia and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. "I missed this," he said quietly. "Missed you. Even when I was trying to stay away, trying to keep you safe, I missed you every single day." The admission hung between them, dangerous and electric. Lena wanted to protect herself, to maintain emotional distance, but she also remembered what they'd had during those 3 weeks. The intensity, the connection, the way Marco had looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. "I should rest," she said finally, deflecting because she wasn't ready to examine these feelings yet. "Maria said to sleep when the baby sleeps." Marco nodded, understanding the deflection for what it was. He transferred Sophia back to her bassinet with visible reluctance, then moved toward the door. "If you need anything—" "You're just down the hall," Lena finished. "I know." He paused, looking back at her with an expression that made her chest ache. "For what it's worth, Lena, this feels right. You here, Sophia here, all of us under one roof. It feels like something I've been missing without knowing it." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts and a sleeping baby, and the growing certainty that whatever happened next, her life would never be simple again. Because Marco DeLuca wasn't asking for convenience or temporary arrangement. He was asking for a chance to build a family. And despite everything, despite her anger and fear and uncertainty, part of Lena desperately wanted to give it to him. The first week passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Sophia's tiny demands organizing time in ways Lena had never experienced. The master suite became her entire world, a cocoon of soft lighting and Maria's gentle guidance and Marco's careful visits that grew longer each day. He'd appear in the doorway during Sophia's late-night feedings, wordless but present, and somehow his quiet company made the exhaustion more bearable. On the 8th day, Lena woke to voices downstairs, not the usual quiet murmur of household staff, but something sharper, more urgent. She found Sophia sleeping peacefully in her bassinet and pulled on the robe Marco had provided, moving carefully down the hallway despite the soreness that still plagued her body. The voices grew clear as she descended the stairs, Marco's low and dangerous, another man's defensive and increasingly panicked. "I don't care what the timeline was supposed to be," Marco was saying. "The situation has changed. I want a full audit of every warehouse, every shipment, every contact who might have access to information about my personal life." "That's going to take months," the other man protested. "The disruption alone—" "Then it takes months," Marco cut him off coldly. "My daughter's safety isn't negotiable, Vincent. If you can't handle the assignment, I'll find someone who can." Lena paused on the landing, suddenly uncertain whether to continue or retreat. But Marco must have sensed her presence because he turned, his expression shifting instantly from cold authority to something softer. "Lena, I didn't know you were awake. Is Sophia—" "She's fine," Lena interrupted, descending the rest of the stairs. "Still sleeping. What's going on?" The other man, Vincent, apparently, looked between them with obvious discomfort. He was older than Marco, maybe 50, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years managing difficult situations. "Nothing you need to worry about," Marco said, but the tightness around his eyes told Lena he was lying. "Don't do that," she said quietly. "Don't treat me like I'm too fragile to handle reality. If something's wrong, I need to know." Marco's jaw worked for a moment before he nodded to Vincent. "Give us a minute." Vincent left quickly, clearly relieved to escape the tension. Marco waited until the door closed before speaking again,
his voice carefully controlled. There's been chatter. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me cautious. Someone asking questions about me, about changes in my routine, about whether the rumors are true. What rumors? Lena asked, though part of her already knew. That I have a family now, Marco said flatly. That there's a vulnerability where there wasn't one before. He moved closer, his eyes scanning her face. I'm handling it. Tightening security, limiting information flow, making it very clear that any threat to you or Sophia will be met with permanent consequences. The casual way he mentioned permanent consequences should have frightened Lena. Instead, she found herself oddly comforted by the cold certainty in his voice. This was who Marco was. A man who eliminated threats without hesitation when people he cared about were at risk. How serious is it? She asked. Not serious yet, Marco admitted. But it could become serious if I don't address it proactively. That's what I'm doing, making sure problems don't have a chance to develop into threats. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the house. This is what you meant, isn't it? When you said your life was dangerous. This constant calculation of threats and vulnerabilities, and who might try to hurt the people you care about. Yes, Marco said simply. This is my world, Lena. I won't lie to you about what it involves. And you think you can just transition away from it? Lena asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Just walk away from years of building this empire? Marco's expression hardened. I don't think I can. I know I will. Because the alternative, raising Sophia in a world where she's constantly at risk, where every birthday party or school event requires security assessments, that's not acceptable. But it takes time, Lena said, echoing his words from days earlier. And in the meantime, we're living in that world whether we want to or not. In the meantime, you're protected, Marco countered. This house has better security than most government buildings. My team is the best money can buy. And I'm here, making sure nothing gets close enough to threaten either of you. It should have been reassuring. Instead, Lena felt the walls of the beautiful house closing in slightly. She'd traded her cramped apartment and financial uncertainty for luxury and safety, but she'd also traded freedom for protection that sometimes felt uncomfortably like control. I need air, she said abruptly. I haven't been outside in over a week. Marco frowned. The doctor said you should rest. I'm not an invalid, Marco. I had a baby, not a lobotomy. Lena moved toward the front door, driven by sudden, desperate need for space. I'm going to walk in the garden. You can station security every 10 feet if it makes you feel better, but I'm not staying locked in that room for another day. She expected him to argue, to list all the reasons why it wasn't safe or wasn't smart. Instead, Marco simply nodded. Let me get a jacket for you. It's cold out. The garden was beautiful even in late winter, bare trees and dormant flower beds that would probably be spectacular in spring. Marco walked beside her, maintaining a careful distance, but clearly ready to catch her if she stumbled. His security team was invisible but present, shadows that moved at the edges of her peripheral vision. Tell me about your sister, Lena said after several minutes of silence. The one with the baby you helped care for. Marco's entire body tensed. That's not a good story, Lena. I still want to hear it. He was quiet for so long that Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice stripped of emotion in a way that made the pain underneath even more obvious. Her name was Gabriella. She was 20 when she got pregnant by a man my father hated, some kid from a rival family trying to make peace through romance instead of business. My father didn't see it as peace. He saw it as betrayal. Marco paused, his hands clenching into fists. He made her choose, the baby or the family. She chose the baby. Lena's stomach dropped. What happened? My father cut her off completely. No money, no protection, nothing. She was living in a studio smaller than yours, working 2 jobs trying to raise my nephew alone. I was 16 and trying to help without my father finding out. His voice cracked slightly. I wasn't careful enough. He found out I was sending her money, and he... Marco stopped walking, turning to face the empty garden. He had someone run her off the road, made it look like an accident. She survived, but the baby didn't. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. Marco, I'm so sorry. She left Chicago after that, Marco continued as if Lena hadn't spoken. Changed her name, cut all contact with the family. I haven't seen her in 15 years. Don't even know if she's still alive." He finally looked at Lena, and the raw pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "That's my legacy, Lena. That's the world I grew up in, where love is weakness and family is just another tool for control." "But you're not your father," Lena said quietly. "No," Marco agreed. "I'm not, but I learned from him. I built my empire using his methods, his contacts, his complete disregard for anything that didn't serve his interests. And now I have a daughter, and all I can think about is Gabriella. How she chose love and lost everything. How my father saw her happiness as a threat that needed to be eliminated." Lena moved closer, driven by instinct more than conscious thought. She reached for Marco's hand, and he gripped it like a lifeline. "Sophia won't grow up in that world," Lena said firmly. "We won't let her. Whatever it takes, whatever changes you need to make, we'll figure it out together." Marco's eyes searched her face. "Together? Does that mean you're staying? Not just temporarily, but—" "I don't know what it means," Lena interrupted honestly. "I'm still angry at you for leaving. I'm still terrified of what your world involves. But I also see you with Sophia, and I see someone trying desperately to be different than what he was raised to be. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Marco said roughly, pulling her closer. For a moment, Lena thought he might kiss her, and she wasn't sure if she wanted him to or if she'd push him away. But he just pressed his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "I won't let you down again. Either of you, I swear it." The sound of Sophia crying drifted through an open window, and they both turned toward the house automatically. Maria appeared on the back terrace, holding the baby, her expression apologetic. "She's hungry," Maria called. "I tried the pacifier, but she wants Mom." Lena started back toward the house, Marco keeping pace beside her. Inside, she settled into the rocking chair in the nursery, while Sophia latched on eagerly, her small hands kneading at Lena's chest with surprising strength. Marco stood in the doorway watching them, and Lena saw longing there. Not sexual, but something deeper and more complicated. The longing of a man who'd never had a real family, who'd lost his mother young and watched his father destroy his sister's chance at happiness. Now he had a daughter, and Lena could see him trying to figure out how to protect her without becoming the monster who'd raised him. "You can come closer," Lena said softly. "You don't have to hover in the doorway like a stranger." Marco moved into the room, settling into the chair Angela had placed near the window. "I don't want to intrude." "You're her father, Marco. You can't intrude on your own daughter's feeding time." Lena adjusted Sophia slightly, then met Marco's eyes. "Tell me about the changes you're making. The transition away from the dangerous parts of your business. What does that actually look like?" Marco leaned back, considering his words carefully. "I've been involved in shipping for 15 years. Started young under my father's guidance, took over completely when he died 8 years ago. About 60% of the business is completely legitimate, importing goods, managing logistics, working with established vendors. The other 40% involves moving things that shouldn't be moved and dealing with people who solve problems through violence rather than negotiation." "And you're planning to just walk away from 40% of your revenue?" Lena asked skeptically. "I'm planning to sell it," Marco corrected, "piece by piece to people who won't trace it back to me, who won't create vulnerabilities by association. It's complicated because I can't just announce I'm going legitimate. That makes me look weak, and weakness attracts predators. I have to do it strategically over time while maintaining enough strength that no one sees an opening to attack." "How long will that take?" 2 years, maybe 3, Marco said. "By the time Sophia is old enough to remember anything, I'll be running a completely clean operation. But in the meantime, there's risk. People will notice the changes. Some will see them as opportunities. That's why security is so tight right now, why I'm being so careful about information and access." Lena absorbed this, watching Sophia's face as she nursed. "What happens if someone decides to force the issue, to create a crisis that makes you choose between the business and us?" Marco's expression went cold and hard. "Then I choose you, and I make sure whoever forced that choice regrets it for the very short time they have left." The casual brutality should have horrified Lena. Instead, she found herself thinking about Gabriella, about a young woman who'd chosen love and lost everything because her father valued power over family.
Marco was different. He was choosing differently. And if that choice required violence to protect, Lena wasn't sure she could judge him for it. Sophia finished nursing and promptly fell asleep. Her small face relaxed in that boneless way unique to satisfied infants. Lena handed her to Marco, who cradled her with growing confidence. "She trusts you already," Lena observed. "Look at how she settles when you hold her." Marco's expression softened into something Lena had never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated love. "She's perfect," he murmured. "Absolutely perfect. I don't know what I did to deserve her, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that trust." The moment was shattered by Marco's phone buzzing urgently. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted instantly to something dark and dangerous. "What is it?" Lena asked, tension coiling in her stomach. "Stay here," Marco said, transferring Sophia to Lena and moving toward the door. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except Maria or Angela." "Marco, what's happening?" He paused in the doorway, and when he looked back, Lena saw the man his enemies must see. Cold, calculating, absolutely ruthless. "Someone just tried to breach the perimeter. My security team has them contained, but I need to handle this personally." His voice softened fractionally. "You're safe. The house is locked down. But I need you to stay in this room until I come back for you." Then he was gone, his footsteps rapid down the hallway. Lena heard him barking orders, heard the house come alive with activity that had been invisible until this moment. She moved to the door and locked it, as instructed, then carried Sophia to the window. The garden that had seemed so peaceful an hour ago was now crawling with security personnel. She could see Marco striding across the lawn toward a cluster of men near the back fence, his entire bearing radiating authority and barely controlled violence. "It's okay," Lena whispered to Sophia, who slept on oblivious. "Your daddy's going to keep us safe. That's what he does. Keeps people safe, even if his methods are sometimes terrifying." She watched through the window as Marco reached the security team. Even from this distance, she could see the confrontation. A man on his knees, Marco standing over him, the conversation clearly intense. Then Marco made a gesture, and two security guards dragged the man away toward a black van that materialized from somewhere. Lena's hands tightened on Sophia. This was real. Not theoretical danger or abstract threats, but an actual person who'd tried to breach the property, who'd gotten close enough to trigger the security response. And Marco had handled it with the kind of cold efficiency that spoke of long practice. 20 minutes later, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Lena, it's me. You can open up." She recognized Marco's voice, but still felt her heart hammering as she unlocked the door. He stood in the hallway looking disheveled, his jacket gone and his shirt sleeves rolled up. There was a cut on his knuckles that hadn't been there before. "What happened?" Lena demanded. "Who was that?" Marco entered the room and closed the door behind him. "A reporter. Someone who'd heard rumors about me having a child and thought climbing the fence for photos would be worth the trespassing charge." His voice was flat, emotionless. "He was wrong." "A reporter?" Lena repeated. "You had him dragged away by armed guards because he was a reporter?" "I had him removed because he breached my property trying to photograph my family without permission," Marco corrected, an edge creeping into his voice. "His press credentials don't give him the right to invade our privacy or put Sophia at risk." "But he's just a reporter, Marco, not some criminal trying to hurt us." Marco's expression hardened. "Today, he was a reporter. Tomorrow, it could be someone using press credentials as cover for something worse. I don't take chances with your safety, Lena. Not ever." They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them. Lena wanted to argue that he was being paranoid, overreacting, but she also remembered his story about Gabriella, about how his father's enemies had used his sister's vulnerability against her. In Marco's world, there was no such thing as being too careful. "What did you do to him?" she asked quietly. "Nothing permanent," Marco said. "I made it very clear that any photos he took are now the property of my legal team, and that if anything about Sophia or you appears in print, I'll sue him and his employer into bankruptcy." Then I had him escorted off the property and banned from coming within 500 feet of this address. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Marco confirmed. "Welcome to the benefits of wealth and power, Lena. I can make problems disappear before they become serious threats."
Lena moved to the window, looking out at the garden that had returned to peaceful stillness.
The security team had vanished again, but she knew they were still there, watching from positions she couldn't see. "This is what our life looks like now," she said, not quite a question. Marco moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "For now, yes, but it won't always be this intense. Once the transition is complete, once people understand that I'm no longer an active player in the more dangerous aspects of my business, the attention will fade. Sophia will be able to live normally, school, friends, activities, all the things I never had." "You really believe that's possible?" Lena asked, turning to face him. "That you can just walk away from everything you've built?" "I have to believe it," Marco said simply, "because the alternative is raising my daughter in the same world that killed my nephew and destroyed my sister's life. I won't do that, Lena. I'd rather burn my entire empire to the ground than put Sophia through what Gabriella endured." The fierce conviction in his voice made Lena's chest ache. She reached up without thinking, touching the cut on his knuckles. "You hit him." "He tried to run," Marco said, no apology in his tone. "I stopped him." "With your fist." "It was efficient." Lena shook her head, unable to suppress a small, slightly hysterical laugh. "You're impossible. You know that, right? Completely, utterly impossible." Marco's expression softened slightly. "But you're still here. Still letting me be part of Sophia's life. That has to mean something." "It means I'm probably as crazy as you are," Lena said, but there was no heat in it. She looked down at Sophia, sleeping peacefully despite the drama that had unfolded around her. "She's going to grow up thinking all of this is normal. The security, the wealth, the casual way you handle threats. How do we teach her about the real world when this is all she knows?" "We teach her by being honest," Marco said.
"By showing her that money and power don't make people valuable, kindness and integrity do. By making sure she understands that privilege comes with responsibility." He paused. "And we teach her that her father made mistakes, but he spent the rest of his life trying to build something better for his family." Sophia stirred in Lena's arms, making small sounds that suggested she'd be waking soon. Marco reached out instinctively, running a gentle finger across his daughter's cheek. "I should feed her again soon," Lena said. "She's on a pretty strict 2-hour schedule." "I'll have Angela bring up food for you," Marco said, already moving toward the door. "You need to keep your strength up." "Marco!" Lena called, stopping him. "Thank you. For handling the reporter, for keeping us safe, for..." She paused, searching for words. "For trying so hard to be different than what you were raised to be." Something profound shifted in Marco's expression. "You don't need to thank me for that, Lena. Protecting you and Sophia isn't a burden. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore." He hesitated in the doorway. "Get some rest. I'll be right downstairs if you need anything." After he left, Lena settled back into the rocking chair with Sophia, her mind churning through everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she'd been alone in a hospital room, terrified and uncertain. Now she was living in a mansion with round-the-clock security, watching the father of her child navigate the dangerous process of transforming his entire life. It should have felt overwhelming, and it did, sometimes. Late at night when Sophia was sleeping and Lena lay awake wondering if she'd made the right choice bringing Marco into their lives. But it also felt right in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Watching Marco with Sophia, seeing the fierce love in his eyes, and the gentle way he handled her, Lena understood that whatever else he might be, Marco DeLuca was a man who loved his daughter with absolute conviction. The question was whether that love would be enough to overcome the darkness of his past, and whether Lena was brave enough to stay and find out. 3 weeks after the reporter incident, Lena woke to the sound of breaking glass somewhere in the house. For a moment, disoriented by exhaustion and the pre-dawn darkness, she thought she'd imagined it. Then she heard shouting, Marco's voice raised in a way she'd never heard before, urgent and commanding. She was out of bed instantly, ignoring the protest of muscles still recovering from childbirth. Sophia was awake in her bassinet, fussing but not yet crying. Lena scooped her up, heart hammering against her ribs, and moved toward the door just as it burst open. Marco stood in the doorway, and Lena's breath caught at his expression, raw fear barely contained beneath cold fury. He was holding a gun, she realized with shock. She'd known intellectually that Marco was dangerous, that his world involved violence, but seeing the weapon in his hand made it viscerally real. "Get Sophia and come with me," he said, his voice clipped and controlled. "Now, Lena, don't ask questions." "What's happening?" Lena demanded, even as she grabbed the diaper bag with one hand, clutching Sophia against her chest with the other. "The house is under attack," Marco said flatly. "Multiple hostiles breaching the perimeter. My team is engaging, but I'm not taking chances. There's a safe room in the basement. You'll be secure there until this is over." Attack. The word didn't seem real, didn't fit with the beautiful mansion and the peaceful routine they'd established, but the sound of gunfire echoing from somewhere downstairs made it impossible to deny. Marco led them down a back staircase Lena hadn't known existed, his body positioned between her and any potential threat. Two of his security team materialized from the shadows, falling into formation around them. Sophia was crying now, picking up on Lena's terror, her small wails seeming impossibly loud in the tense silence. "Shh, baby, it's okay," Lena whispered desperately, though nothing about this was okay. "Daddy's going to keep us safe. It's going to be okay." The safe room was behind a section of wall in the wine cellar that swung open at Marco's touch. Inside was a space maybe 15 feet square, lined with monitors showing security feeds from around the property. Lena could see armed men in dark clothing moving through the garden, could see Marco's security team engaging them with professional precision. "How many?" Marco asked one of his guards, a man named Thomas, who'd been part of the detail since Lena arrived. "At least 8 confirmed," Thomas replied grimly. "They came prepared, cut the power to the outer cameras, used flashbangs to disorient the perimeter team. This isn't opportunistic, boss. This is organized." Marco's jaw clenched so hard Lena heard his teeth grind. "Lock them in," he told Thomas. "No one comes through that door except me or someone I've personally cleared. If you're uncertain, assume hostile and act accordingly."
"Marco, wait," Lena started, but he was already turning to face her, and the look in his eyes stopped her cold. "I need to handle this," he said quietly. "My team is good, but they need direction. And whoever organized this attack needs to understand very clearly what happens when someone threatens my family." "You can't just go out there," Lena protested, fear making her voice shake. "You'll get yourself killed." Marco moved closer, cupping her face with his free hand while the other still gripped the gun. "I've been handling situations like this since I was 20 years old, Lena. I know what I'm doing." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "But I need to know you and Sophia are safe first. Please. Stay here. Let Thomas protect you, and trust that I will come back." Lena wanted to argue, to demand he stay with them and let his security team handle the threat.
But she could see the cold determination in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was the only one who could resolve this. So she nodded, even though her chest felt like it was caving in. Marco pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her forehead, then touched Sophia's head with unexpected gentleness. "I love you both," he said roughly. "Remember that." Then he was gone, the heavy door swinging shut behind him with a finality that made Lena's stomach drop. She heard the locks engage, multiple mechanisms clicking into place, and suddenly she and Sophia were sealed in this underground room with only Thomas and the security monitors for company. "Ms. Hart, you should sit," Thomas said, gesturing to a comfortable chair positioned facing the monitors. "This could take a while." Lena sat because her legs were shaking too badly to stand, adjusting Sophia against her shoulder and trying to soothe her panicked crying. On the monitors, she could see Marco moving through the house with deadly purpose, his security team falling into formation around him. The attackers were everywhere, shadowy figures moving through rooms Lena had walked through just hours ago, turning her temporary sanctuary into a war zone. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Why are they doing this?" Thomas hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Mr. DeLuca has been making changes to his business operations. Not everyone is happy about those changes. This is someone making a statement, trying to prove that he's vulnerable now, that having a family makes him weak." "That's insane," Lena said. "Attacking someone's home, putting a baby at risk, how does that prove anything except that they're monsters?" "In Mr. DeLuca's world, showing mercy is weakness," Thomas said quietly. "Loving someone openly is an invitation for enemies to exploit that love. These people see Sophia as leverage,
a way to control a man who's always been impossible to control. Lena pulled Sophia closer, fierce protectiveness surging through her. They're not getting near her. I don't care what it takes. That's why we're here, ma'am, Thomas said. Mr. DeLuca built this room specifically for situations like this. The walls are reinforced steel. The door would take explosives to breach. You're as safe here as anywhere in the world. On the monitors, Lena watched Marco round a corner and come face to face with two attackers. The confrontation lasted maybe 10 seconds, a brief, brutal exchange that ended with both men on the ground and Marco continuing forward without breaking stride. The casual efficiency of the violence made Lena's stomach turn. He's done this before, she said, not quite a question. Many times, Thomas confirmed. Mr. DeLuca didn't build his reputation by avoiding conflict, ma'am.
He built it by ending conflicts so decisively that people thought twice before starting new ones. Sophia's crying had subsided to hiccuping whimpers, exhaustion and fear wearing her down. Lena rocked her gently, eyes fixed on the monitors, tracking Marco's progress through the house. She watched him coordinate with his security team using hand signals and brief commands, watched him clear rooms with the kind of tactical precision that spoke of extensive training. Where did he learn to do that? Lena asked. To fight like that? His father started training him young, Thomas said. Military instructors, hand-to-hand combat specialists, weapons experts. By the time Mr. DeLuca was 16, he could handle himself better than most adults. It's part of why he's still alive when so many of his father's other associates aren't. A new group of attackers appeared on the monitors, moving toward the wine cellar, toward the safe room. Lena's breath caught, and Thomas immediately moved to stand between her and the door, his own weapon drawn. They can't get in, he said calmly. But stay quiet just in case. Lena clamped her hand over Sophia's mouth gently, muffling any sound she might make. On the monitors, she could see the attackers searching the wine cellar, clearly looking for something or someone. One of them stood directly in front of the hidden door, so close Lena could see the details of his face. Then Marco appeared behind them, emerging from the shadows like something from a nightmare. What followed was too fast for Lena to fully process. A brief, violent confrontation that ended with all three attackers incapacitated and Marco standing over them, chest heaving with exertion. He looked directly at the camera hidden in the wine cellar's ceiling, and even through the monitor, Lena could see the question in his eyes. She nodded, not sure if he could see her but needing to communicate somehow that she and Sophia were okay. Marco's expression shifted to something like relief, then hardened again as he spoke into a communication device Lena hadn't noticed before. On other monitors, she could see his security team systematically clearing the house, subduing the remaining attackers with professional efficiency. It's almost over, Thomas said quietly. Mr. DeLuca's team is very good at their jobs. 20 minutes later, the locks on the safe room door disengaged. Lena tensed, every muscle in her body coiled to protect Sophia, until Marco stepped through the doorway. He looked like he'd been through a war, shirt torn, blood on his knuckles and splattered across his chest, a cut above his left eye that was still bleeding. Is any of that blood yours? Lena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Some of it, Marco admitted. Nothing serious. Are you both okay? Sophia, we're fine, Lena interrupted. Lena, scared but fine. Marco, what just happened? Who were those people? Marco moved closer, reaching for Sophia with hands that trembled slightly, despite his outward control. He held his daughter against his chest, breathing hard, and Lena saw the fear he'd been suppressing break through his composure. The Volkov organization, he said finally. Russian syndicate that's been trying to expand into my territory for the past year. I've been blocking their moves, refusing to negotiate, making it clear I won't tolerate their presence in Chicago. This was their response, an attempt to prove I'm vulnerable, to force me to either negotiate from weakness or escalate to full-scale war. What are you going to do? Lena asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Marco's eyes met hers, and she saw cold fury there, the kind of rage that had been building beneath his controlled surface since the moment the attack began. I'm going to end this, permanently. The Volkovs need to understand that threatening my family isn't a negotiating tactic. It's a death sentence. The flat certainty in his voice should have frightened Lena. Instead, she found herself nodding, her own anger rising to match his. These people had attacked their home, had put Sophia at risk, had turned what should have been a safe space into a battlefield. They deserved whatever consequences Marco chose to deliver. "How?" she asked quietly. Marco handed Sophia back to Lena, his expression shifting to something calculating and cold. "I have contacts, people who owe me favors, people who've been waiting for permission to move against the Volkovs. I'm going to unleash them all at once, coordinate a response so overwhelming that the Volkov organization won't have time to regroup. By this time tomorrow, they'll either be in federal custody or fleeing the country." "That sounds like war," Lena said. "It is war," Marco confirmed, "and I'm going to win it so decisively that no one else gets the idea to try this again." Thomas cleared his throat diplomatically. "Sir, the house is secure. All hostiles have been contained. No casualties on our side, though Jenkins took a round to the vest. He'll be sore, but he's fine. What do you want us to do with the attackers?" "Hold them in the garage," Marco said. "I'll deal with them after I make sure Lena and Sophia are settled. And Thomas, call Viktor Petrov. Tell him I'm calling in that favor he owes me and that I need it now." Thomas nodded and disappeared, leaving the three of them alone in the safe room. Marco sank into the chair Lena had occupied, suddenly looking exhausted in a way she'd never seen before. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I promised you'd be safe here, and instead I brought war to your doorstep." Lena sat in the chair beside him, Sophia sleeping now against her chest, worn out by fear and crying. "This isn't your fault, Marco. You didn't attack us. The Volkovs did." "But they attacked because of decisions I made," Marco countered. "Because I've been transitioning away from the violent parts of my business, because they saw that transition as weakness. If I'd handled things differently, if I'd been more careful—" "Stop," Lena interrupted firmly. "You can't second-guess every decision. You're trying to build a better life for Sophia, and some people don't want you to succeed. That's on them, not you." Marco reached out, running a gentle finger across Sophia's small hand. "I need to escalate this, Lena. I need to respond with enough force that no one else gets ideas. That means things are going to get ugly for the next few days. Probably violent, definitely dangerous. I can have you move somewhere safer, somewhere completely removed from my world. A house in the suburbs under a different name, security that's invisible but thorough. You wouldn't have to be part of any of this." Lena stared at him, processing the offer. He was giving her an out, a chance to step away from the violence and chaos that defined his life. Part of her desperately wanted to take it, to grab Sophia and run somewhere quiet and normal, where the biggest threat was a stranger in a grocery store parking lot. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since the night Sophia was born, refused to abandon Marco to handle this alone. "No," she said quietly. "We're not leaving. You're Sophia's father, and whatever happens, we handle it as a family." "Lena, you don't understand what I'm asking," Marco said urgently. "The kind of response I'm planning, people are going to get hurt, badly. Some of them might die. And if something goes wrong, if the Volkovs manage to strike back before I eliminate them completely, you and Sophia could be caught in the crossfire." "Then make sure nothing goes wrong," Lena said simply. "Do what you need to do to end this threat. But don't ask me to run away and pretend you're not fighting for our future." Marco looked at her with an expression that made Lena's chest ache, gratitude and disbelief mixing with something that looked dangerously like love. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most reckless." "Maybe both," Lena admitted. "But I meant what I said earlier. We're in this together. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. Not anymore." Before Marco could respond, his phone buzzed with incoming messages. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened immediately. "The Volkovs are already trying to spin this," he said, anger threading through his voice. "They're putting out word that I'm weak, that my security was easily breached, that having a family makes me vulnerable to pressure. They think this failed attack still accomplishes their goal of making me look compromised. So prove them wrong," Lena said. "Show them that threatening your family doesn't make you weak. It makes you absolutely ruthless." Marco's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw something shift in his expression, recognition that she understood his world better than he'd thought, that she wasn't going to beg him to choose peace over necessary violence.
I need to make calls, he said, standing. Coordinate the response, activate contacts I haven't used in years. It's going to take most of the night. He hesitated. Will you be okay if I'm working? Thomas can stay with you, and I'll have Maria come back to help with Sophia. We'll be fine, Lena assured him. Go do what needs to be done, just... She paused, meeting his eyes. Come back safe. Sophia needs her father. The unspoken addition hung between them. Lena needed him too, though she wasn't quite ready to say it aloud. But Marco heard it anyway.
She could see it at the way his expression softened, in the careful way he leaned down to press a kiss to Sophia's forehead, and then, more hesitantly, to Lena's cheek. I'll come back, he promised. Always. Then he was gone, striding out of the safe room with renewed purpose, already pulling out his phone and firing off commands to people Lena couldn't see. Thomas returned with Maria, who looked shaken but composed, ready to help however needed. Let's get you both upstairs, Maria said gently. The master suite has been checked and cleared. You'll be comfortable there while Mr. DeLuca handles the situation. Lena let Maria guide her back through the house, trying not to look at the evidence of violence, scuffed walls, broken furniture, blood stains that would need professional cleaning. The beautiful mansion had been violated, turned into something that felt more like a fortress than a home. In the master suite, Maria helped Lena change Sophia's diaper and get her settled for what remained of the night. But Lena couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop her mind from racing through everything that had happened. She kept replaying the moment she'd seen Marco with the gun, the casual efficiency with which he dealt with the attackers, the cold fury in his eyes when he talked about ending the Volkov threat. This was who he really was, beneath the expensive suits and careful control, a man capable of extraordinary violence when people he loved were threatened. And instead of being repelled, Lena found herself understanding it, even accepting it as necessary. Around 3 a.m, Marco returned to the suite. He moved quietly, clearly trying not to wake Sophia, but Lena was already awake. How bad is it? She asked. Marco sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I've activated every resource I have. By dawn, the Volkovs will be dealing with simultaneous federal raids on their warehouses, their legitimate businesses, and their known safe houses. The ones who aren't arrested will be too busy running to think about retaliating. You can arrange federal raids just like that? Lena asked, not sure if she was impressed or horrified. I have contacts in law enforcement who've been building cases against the Volkovs for months, Marco explained. They've been waiting for the right moment to move. I just gave them that moment, along with some additional intelligence that makes their cases airtight. What about the men who attacked the house? Marco's expression went cold. They're being questioned. The ones who cooperate will be turned over to the FBI with testimony that ensures long sentences. The ones who don't cooperate... He stopped, jaw clenching. Let's just say they won't be a problem anymore. Lena should have been disturbed by the implication, by the casual way Marco discussed eliminating threats. Instead, she felt nothing but grim satisfaction. These men had tried to hurt her daughter. Whatever happened to them was justice as far as she was concerned. Come here, she said quietly, patting the bed beside her. You need to rest. Marco looked surprised by the invitation, but didn't hesitate. He kicked off his shoes and lay down beside her, careful to maintain space between them. But Lena shifted closer, drawn by instinct and the need for human connection after hours of fear. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping us safe, for doing whatever it took. Marco turned to face her, and in the dim light from Sophia's nightlight, Lena could see the exhaustion and pain in his eyes. I would do anything for you both, he said quietly. Burn down the whole city if that's what it took. Does that frighten you? Lena considered the question honestly. It should, she admitted, but it doesn't. Maybe that makes me as crazy as you are. Or maybe it makes you perfect for me, Marco said, and the raw honesty in his voice made Lena's breath catch. They lay there in the darkness, listening to Sophia's peaceful breathing, both of them processing the violence that had shattered their fragile peace. And somewhere in those quiet moments, Lena made a decision. She wasn't leaving, wasn't running from Marco's world or pretending she could raise Sophia separately from her father's reality. Whatever came next, whether it was more violence or the slow transformation Marco had promised, they would face it together.
Because despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the blood on Marco's hands, Lena trusted him to protect their daughter. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to trust him with her heart again too. The days following the attack blurred together in a haze of tension and waiting. Marco disappeared for hours at a time, coordinating the systematic dismantling of the Volkov organization with the kind of ruthless precision that reminded Lena exactly who she'd chosen to trust with her daughter's safety. When he returned, he was different, harder somehow. The careful control he usually maintained stripped away to reveal something colder beneath. But with Sophia, he remained impossibly gentle. Lena would find him in the nursery at odd hours, just watching their daughter sleep, his expression vulnerable in ways he never allowed during daylight. She'd see him holding Sophia against his chest, whispering promises about the future he was building for her. And Lena's heart would ache with the complexity of loving a man capable of such tenderness and such violence. On the 5th day after the attack, Marco appeared in the doorway of the master suite, looking more exhausted than Lena had ever seen him. But there was also something different in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or the first hint of peace she'd witnessed since that terrible night. "It's over," he said quietly. "The Volkovs are finished. The leadership is either in federal custody or fled to Russia. The ones who stayed behind to manage operations have been neutralized. There's no one left with the resources or motivation to come after us." Lena was feeding Sophia in the rocking chair, and she looked up at Marco's words, searching his face for signs of what that neutralization had cost him. "How many people died?" Marco's jaw tightened. "Does it matter? They made their choice when they attacked our home." "It matters to me," Lena said softly. "I need to know what you did to keep us safe." Marco moved into the room, settling into the chair by the window that had become his usual spot during these feeding sessions. "3 of the men who attacked the house are dead. The rest are cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The Volkov leadership—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some situations resolve themselves when people understand there's no path forward except cooperation or consequences." "That's not an answer," Lena pressed. "No," Marco agreed. "It's not. But it's all the answer I can give you right now. I did what was necessary to eliminate a threat to my family. The specifics don't change that reality." Lena absorbed this, understanding that Marco was drawing a line, protecting her from details that would implicate her or burden her with knowledge she didn't need. Part of her wanted to push, to demand full transparency, but another part recognized that some things were better left unspoken, especially when the outcome was safety for their daughter. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "With your business, with the transition you talked about?" Marco leaned back, and Lena saw some of the tension drain from his shoulders. "Now I accelerate the timeline. The response to the Volkov threat demonstrated that I'm still strong enough to eliminate threats decisively. That gives me leverage to negotiate from a position of strength rather than perceived weakness. I've already begun conversations with people who'll take over the pieces of my empire I no longer want to manage." "How long?" Lena asked. 6 months, Marco said. "Maybe less. I'm not being cautious anymore, not drawing this out over years. I want to be completely legitimate before Sophia is old enough to understand what her father does for a living." The certainty in his voice made Lena's chest tight. "That's fast. Won't people see it as you backing down, giving up power?" "They'll see it as me choosing my priorities," Marco corrected. "And anyone who interprets that as weakness just learned a very painful lesson about what happens when they underestimate me." Sophia finished nursing and immediately fell asleep, her small body going boneless against Lena's chest. Marco stood and moved closer, taking their daughter with the practiced ease he'd developed over the past month. He cradled her against his shoulder, swaying slightly in the unconscious rhythm parents everywhere seemed to discover instinctively. "I've been thinking about something," Marco said quietly. "After everything that happened, the attack, the response, all of it, I realized I can't keep doing this. Can't keep building a life in Chicago where every corner holds memories of violence and every business contact is someone who knows what I was. Sophia deserves better." Lena's heart rate picked up. "What are you saying?" I'm saying we should leave, Marco said, meeting her eyes. Sell this house, liquidate the legitimate businesses, or turn them over to managers, and start completely fresh somewhere new. Somewhere Sophia can grow up without security teams and safe rooms and the constant awareness of danger. Where would we go? Lena asked, mind racing through the implications. Marco moved to the window, still holding Sophia, looking out at the garden that had been a battlefield less than a week ago. I've been looking at properties in Northern California. Wine country. There's an estate for sale near Sonoma, vineyards, guest houses, enough land that Sophia could run free without fear. I could buy it outright, establish completely legitimate business operations around wine production and distribution. No connections to my past, no links to Chicago or the people who know what I built here. The vision he painted was so different from anything Lena had imagined that she struggled to process it. Marco DeLuca, crime boss and master of Chicago's underworld, becoming a vintner in California wine country. It should have seemed absurd. Instead, it sounded like exactly what they all needed. That's a huge change, she said carefully. Are you sure you could walk away from everything you've built here? Marco turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made Lena's breath catch. I'm sure that what I've built here doesn't matter if it costs me my family. I'm sure that Sophia deserves to grow up somewhere beautiful and safe, where her last name doesn't carry the weight of violence and fear. And I'm sure... He paused, jaw working. I'm sure that I love you, Lena. That I've loved you since the first time you told me I was being an arrogant ass and refused to be impressed by my money or power. And I can't imagine building this new life without you beside me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its vulnerability. Lena had known on some level that Marco's feelings ran deeper than responsibility or protection. But hearing him say it aloud, seeing the fear in his eyes that she might not feel the same way, made it impossible to hide behind her own careful walls anymore. I love you too, she whispered. I tried not to. Tried to stay angry, to protect myself from getting hurt again. But watching you with Sophia, seeing you literally fight to keep us safe, willing to dismantle your entire empire just to give our daughter a better life. Her voice cracked. How could I not love you? Marco crossed the room in 3 strides, careful not to jostle Sophia, but clearly driven by desperate need to close the distance between them. He sank onto the bed beside Lena, Sophia cradled between them, and pressed his forehead against hers. Come with me to California, he said quietly. Not as someone I'm protecting or providing for, but as my partner, my equal. Help me build something completely new, something Sophia can be proud of instead of afraid of. Yes, Lena said, the decision feeling right in her bones despite how insane it should have seemed. Yes, we'll come with you. We'll build this new life together. Marco's relief was palpable, his entire body relaxing as if a weight he'd been carrying for months had suddenly lifted. I want to marry you, he said, not because Sophia needs legitimacy or because it makes sense strategically, but because I want everyone to know you chose me despite everything I am. Will you? Ask me again when we're in California, Lena interrupted gently. When we've left all of this behind and started fresh. When I can say yes, knowing it's to the man you're becoming, not the one you were. Marco nodded, understanding the distinction she was making. But you're not saying no? I'm saying ask me in 6 months, after you've proven you can walk away from this world. After we've built something real in a place where violence isn't always one wrong move away. Lena smiled softly. I'm saying I want to marry the man who grows grapes and plays with his daughter in the sunshine, not the one who has to calculate threats and eliminate enemies. That's fair, Marco admitted. More than fair, actually. You're giving me the chance to prove I can be what you both need. Sophia stirred between them, making the small sounds that indicated she'd be waking soon and demanding attention. Both of them shifted focus automatically, the conversation about the future tabled in favor of the immediate needs of their daughter. Over the next 3 months, Lena watched Marco systematically dismantle the empire he'd spent 15 years building. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. Instead, it was a careful, strategic withdrawal orchestrated with the same precision he'd applied to everything else. Business interests were sold or transferred, properties were liquidated. Connections were severed with the kind of finality that made it clear Marco DeLuca was leaving Chicago's underworld permanently. There was pushback, of course.
People who'd relied on Marco's influence, who'd built their own operations around his protection or connections. But Marco handled each objection with cold efficiency, making it clear that his decision was final and non-negotiable. Lena heard pieces of these conversations, Marco's voice hard and unyielding as he explained that his family took precedence over business, that anyone who couldn't accept that reality could consider their association ended. Through it all, Sophia grew and changed with the terrifying speed of infancy. She learned to smile, the expression transforming her small face and reducing Marco to helpless adoration every time. She started tracking objects with her eyes, reaching for toys, making sounds that weren't quite words but seemed to carry meaning anyway. And she responded to her father's voice with clear recognition, calming when he held her, watching his face with the kind of focused attention that suggested she knew exactly who he was and why he mattered. Lena found herself falling into routines that felt dangerously close to domestic contentment. Morning feedings while Marco worked in his study, afternoon walks through the garden with Sophia in her stroller while security maintained invisible watch, evenings when all three of them would sit together in the nursery while Sophia played on her activity mat. It wasn't the life Lena had imagined for herself, but it was becoming the life she wanted more than anything else. The California property closed escrow on a Tuesday in early May. Marco showed Lena the photos, rolling hills covered in grapevines, a main house that managed to be both elegant and welcoming, guest cottages that could house staff or visiting friends. There was a barn that Marco planned to convert into a wine production facility, and acres of land where Sophia could eventually run and play without worrying about boundaries or security concerns. "We can leave whenever you're ready," Marco said, watching Lena's face as she studied the images. "Everything here is handled. The house is sold, the business is transferred, the last of my obligations fulfilled. We can pack up and start fresh." Lena looked around the master suite that had been home for the past 4 months. Despite the violence that had occurred here, despite the constant awareness of danger, she'd built memories in this space. First smiles and midnight feedings, and whispered conversations about the future. Leaving felt both necessary and bittersweet. 2 weeks, she decided. That gives us time to say goodbye properly, to make sure we're not leaving anything unfinished. Marco nodded, then pulled something from his pocket. A small velvet box that made Lena's heart rate spike. "I know you said to ask you in California," he said quietly. "This isn't me asking yet, but I wanted you to know I'm ready whenever you are." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took Lena's breath away. Not ostentatious or overwhelming, but a simple band of platinum with a single perfect diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. It was elegant and understated and somehow exactly what Lena would have chosen herself. "It was my mother's," Marco said softly. "The only thing of hers I kept after she died. I always thought that if I found someone worth keeping, worth building a life with, I'd want them to have it." His eyes met Lena's. "I know we're not there yet. I know I still have to prove myself. But when you're ready, this is what I want to offer you." Lena took the box with trembling hands, studying the ring that represented not just Marco's commitment, but a connection to the woman who'd tried to shield her children from violence and fear. "She would have loved Sophia," Lena said. "She would have loved you," Marco corrected, "for standing up to me, for refusing to be intimidated, for choosing to stay even when leaving would have been easier and safer." He closed Lena's fingers around the box. "Keep it. Think about it. And when we're settled in California, when I've proven I can build something legitimate and good, we'll talk about what comes next." The 2 weeks passed too quickly and too slowly simultaneously. Lena said goodbye to Maria, who'd become more friend than employee, and to Angela, whose quiet competence had made the mansion feel less overwhelming. She packed up Sophia's nursery, carefully wrapping the items they'd take with them and donating the rest to families who needed them more. Marco handled the logistics with his usual efficiency, arranging movers, coordinating the cross-country transport of their belongings, ensuring that the California house would be fully staffed and ready when they arrived. But Lena also saw him taking time for smaller things, visiting his mother's grave one last time, meeting with old associates to formally end relationships that had defined his adult life, standing in his study looking at the city skyline like he was memorizing it or saying goodbye. On their last night in Chicago, Marco found Lena in Sophia's empty nursery, sitting in the rocking chair they'd decided to take with them to California. Sophia was asleep in a portable bassinet, oblivious to the transition happening around her. "Having second thoughts?" Marco asked quietly. Lena shook her head. "Just thinking about how much has changed in 4 months. I came here terrified and alone, and now we're leaving as a family to start completely over." Marco sat on the floor beside the rocking chair, reaching up to take Lena's hand. "Are you happy with all of this? With the choice you made to stay?" Lena considered the question honestly. Happy felt too simple for what she was experiencing. A complex mix of hope and fear and bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. "I'm hopeful," she said finally. "I'm choosing to believe that we can build something better than what we're leaving behind." "That's all I'm asking for," Marco said. "Hope and a chance to prove I can be the man you both deserve." They left Chicago on a Wednesday morning, driving away from the mansion in a convoy that would have seemed excessive if Lena didn't know exactly why Marco insisted on security even now. Thomas rode in the lead vehicle, a final protection until they were safely established in California. Behind them, the city that had been both sanctuary and battlefield faded into the distance. Sophia slept through most of the journey, waking only to nurse and fuss before falling back asleep. Marco drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Lena's knee, a casual intimacy that had developed over months of building trust. They stopped at hotels along the way, Marco always booking entire floors for privacy, his caution ingrained too deeply to abandon even as they moved toward a safer future. Northern California greeted them with golden sunlight and air that smelled like earth and growing things. The estate was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested. The main house built from stone and wood that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape, the vineyard stretching toward hills that turned purple in the evening light. "Welcome home," Marco said as they pulled through the gates, and Lena felt something settle in her chest at the words. The staff Marco had hired appeared immediately, a house manager named Ellen, who reminded Lena of Angela, a vineyard manager named Robert, who'd worked in wine production for 30 years, a small security team that Marco promised would remain invisible unless needed. They helped unload the vehicles while Lena carried Sophia through the house, exploring rooms that would become familiar, imagining the life they'd build in these spaces. The master suite overlooked the vineyards, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view that made Chicago's urban landscape seem like a distant dream. The nursery had been set up exactly to Lena's specifications. Sophia's crib positioned to catch morning light, the rocking chair they'd brought from Chicago placed beside the window, everything arranged to create a space of peace and safety. "What do you think?" Marco asked, coming up behind Lena and wrapping his arms around her waist while she held Sophia. "I think it's perfect," Lena said honestly. "I think we can build something real here." Over the next 6 months, Lena watched Marco transform in ways she'd hoped for but hadn't quite believed possible. He threw himself into learning wine production with the same intensity he'd once applied to building his empire, working alongside Robert in the vineyards, studying fermentation and aging processes, making decisions about which varietals to focus on and how to establish the DeLuca label in a competitive market. But more than that, Lena watched him become present in ways he'd never been in Chicago. He'd take Sophia on morning walks through the vineyard rows, talking to her about the grapes and the seasons and the patient work of creating something beautiful. He'd join Lena for lunch on the terrace, stealing an hour from his day just to sit together and watch their daughter discover the world. He'd put aside work completely in the evenings, dedicating that time to family without the constant interruptions that had defined his Chicago existence. The security team remained but faded into the background as months passed without incident. Thomas eventually returned to Chicago, satisfied that his boss was safely established in his new life. The threats that had seemed so immediate in the aftermath of the Volkov attack never materialized, and gradually Lena found herself relaxing vigilance she hadn't realized she'd been maintaining. Sophia's first birthday arrived with California sunshine and a small celebration that felt almost normal. No armed guards at the perimeter, no careful calculations of who could be trusted with knowledge of their location. Just Ellen and Robert, and a few neighbors from surrounding estates. People who knew Marco as the vintner who'd bought the old Morrison property, not the man he'd been in Chicago. Lena watched Marco help Sophia demolish her first birthday cake, laughing as their daughter smeared frosting across his expensive shirt without a care. This was the man she'd fallen in love with during those 3 intense weeks a year and a half ago. The one who could be playful and present and completely focused on the moment instead of calculating threats and managing empires. That evening, after Sophia was asleep and the last guests had departed, Marco found Lena on the terrace watching the sunset paint the vineyard hills in shades of gold and purple. He carried 2 glasses of wine, the first vintage from their own grapes, bottled just weeks earlier. "To new beginnings," he said, handing her a glass. Lena tasted the wine, pleasantly surprised by its quality. "Robert said this batch was exceptional. He thinks you have real talent for this." "I have talent for obsessing over details until I get things right," Marco corrected with a small smile. "Wine production just happens to reward that tendency." He set down his glass, then pulled the velvet box from his pocket, the one he'd shown Lena 6 months earlier in Chicago. "I think it's time." Lena's heart rate picked up as Marco dropped to one knee on the terrace, the sunset backlighting him in gold. "I promised to ask you again when we were here, when I'd proven I could walk away from my old life and build something legitimate. So I'm asking now, Lena Hart, will you marry me? Not because it makes sense or because Sophia needs it, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Because you gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one, and you've stood by me through the hardest transition of my life. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that choosing me was the right decision." Lena looked at the man kneeling before her, no longer the dangerous crime boss who'd disappeared from her life, not quite the simple vintner he was pretending to be, but something in between. Someone who'd chosen love over power, family over empire, and had transformed himself completely to make that choice real. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Marco slid his mother's ring onto Lena's finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. They kissed with the desperation of people who'd fought too hard for their happiness to take it for granted, who understood exactly how fragile and precious this peace was. "I'm going to make you happy," Marco promised against her lips. "Every single day I'm going to make sure you never regret this choice." "You already do," Lena said honestly. "You make me happy every time you put Sophia before business, every time you choose patience over control, every time you prove you're building a life worth living instead of just surviving." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony in the vineyard, surrounded by the few people who'd become part of their new life. Sophia served as flower girl, stumbling down the aisle in Ellen's arms, reaching for her parents with the absolute trust of a child who'd never known fear. Robert officiated, his weathered face creasing with genuine pleasure as he pronounced them husband and wife. Lena wore a simple white dress that had nothing to do with tradition and everything to do with the fresh start they were claiming. Marco wore a suit but no tie, his formal edges softened by the casual beauty of their surroundings. When they exchanged vows, Lena saw tears in Marco's eyes. The final evidence that the controlled, dangerous man from Chicago had been transformed into someone capable of vulnerability and open emotion. The years that followed weren't perfect. Marco still carried shadows from his past, still woke sometimes from nightmares about threats that no longer existed. The first time someone from Chicago tracked him down, an old associate looking for money or favors, Lena saw the old hardness return briefly before Marco sent them away with cold finality. Building legitimate success took longer than eliminating threats had, requiring patience and persistence that sometimes frustrated a man accustomed to imposing his will on situations. But Sophia grew up running through vineyard rows, chasing butterflies and learning to identify grapes by sight. She learned to swim in the pool Marco had installed, learned to ride the pony he bought for her 3rd birthday, learned that her father's past was complicated but that his love for her was absolute and unwavering. When she asked questions, and eventually she did, curious about why her last name sometimes made people react strangely, Marco answered honestly but age-appropriately, never hiding who he'd been, but making it clear that he'd chosen to be someone different. By Sophia's 5th birthday, the DeLuca label had established itself as a respected boutique winery, producing small batches of exceptional wine that commanded premium prices. Marco had achieved legitimate success on his own terms, building something he could be proud of instead of something he had to hide. The security team had been reduced to a single person who managed the gate and occasionally patrolled the property, more for peace of mind than any real threat. Lena found her own purpose in the new life they'd built, using her years of customer service experience to manage the tasting room they'd opened to visitors. She discovered a talent for hospitality and wine education, creating experiences that brought people back year after year. She and Marco worked side by side most days, their partnership extending beyond parenting into true collaboration on building something lasting. On Sophia's first day of kindergarten, Lena and Marco stood at the end of their driveway watching the school bus pull away. Sophia had been excited rather than nervous, already chattering about the friends she'd make and the things she'd learn. She'd kissed them both goodbye with the casual confidence of a child who'd never doubted her safety or her parents' love. "She's going to be okay," Lena said, more to reassure herself than Marco. "She's going to be extraordinary," Marco corrected. "She already is." He pulled Lena closer, watching the empty road where the bus had disappeared. "Thank you for giving me this. For believing I could change, for staying when you had every reason to run, for building this life with me." Lena leaned into her husband's embrace, thinking about the terrified woman who'd made a desperate call from a hospital room 5 years ago. That woman had been alone and uncertain, gambling everything on a man who'd abandoned her. Now she stood in sunshine with a partner who'd proven his commitment 1,000 different ways, looking at a future that was full of possibility instead of fear. "Thank you for proving me right," Lena said, "for becoming the man I hoped you could be, for giving Sophia the childhood you never had, for choosing us over everything else." Marco pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd traveled through darkness to find light, who'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. In the vineyard behind them, grapes ripened slowly toward harvest. In the house, Sophia's artwork covered the refrigerator, and her toys cluttered the living room. And in the distance, hills rolled toward horizons that held nothing but promise. The life they'd built wasn't the one either of them had planned or expected, but it was real and hard-won, and absolutely worth every sacrifice it had required. Marco had traded his empire for a family, power for partnership, and found that what he'd gained was infinitely more valuable than what he'd surrendered. And Lena, who'd once believed herself too ordinary for an extraordinary man's attention, had discovered that true strength wasn't about control or dominance. It was about choosing love over fear, again and again, until that choice became the foundation of everything that mattered. Together, they'd written a new story. And it was only just beginning.